Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana. And I imagine all of you, like me, have been bombarded, in this period of time from Thanksgiving to Christmas of flyers from retailers and emails from retailers urging us to buy more stuff for the season. And so we here at Thinking Green are continuing our holiday tradition of, shedding light on some of the organizations in our area that are making a difference in people's lives and could use support. And for anyone who'd rather have their holiday dollars go to really having a good influence on what happens here rather than getting more stuff for their house, we're trying to bring more and more organizations on. So with that in mind, my guest today is attorney Joseph Marino, who about a year or so ago became the executive director of New London's Immigration and Advocacy Support Center, more commonly known as IASC. And so we're going to find out what the center does, what services they provide, and how people can become involved and support them. So welcome, Joe.
Oh, thank you, Rona. I really appreciate being here. And I really appreciate the pitch for how one might spend their holiday dollars, because organizations like ours and many other not-for-profits are constantly on the search for funds to keep the lights on. So it is very important. The Immigration Advocacy and Support Center, a very long and complicated name, we refer to the organization as IASC, has been around since 2014. It was first started with Mike Boyle under the auspices of the Church of the City at 8 Washington Street in New London. We're still housed inside of the Church of the City, but at this point we're now a separate 501c3 organization. And I took the reins from Mike, who did an incredible job, sort of with astounding energy, to get this organization sort of off the ground and put it on the map. And I am trying to fill his shoes, and I've been doing it for about the past year and a half. The mission of the Immigration Advocacy and Support Center is simple and straightforward. We are here to provide low-cost, quality legal services to the immigrant community in Southeast Connecticut. We are the only legal services organization in the Norwich, New London area providing any immigration-related assistance. So I think we're filling a really important void here because, there are a lot of recent immigrants to the area. And as traditionally has been the case throughout history, immigrants who come to the United States are usually not wealthy, and
right.
they're usually leaving their countries not because their lives are so great, but because they want a better life for themselves, or they want to be safer or more free. And oftentimes, immigrants have educational and language deficits when they arrive. They're basically sort of sacrificing themselves for the future of their children. And I know that was the case with me. I'm an Italian American, and my grandparents left, southern Italy and came here poor and without English, and their children and their grandchildren have fared fairly well.
Yeah, that's been the experience of so many of us. Also, my grandparents also, around about probably a little over 100 years ago, in the early 1900s, my grandparents all came from Eastern Europe, Jewish, Eastern Europeans, and once again, they left most of their families behind, but they came here for future generations. So yes. It continues.
Yeah, I think the history of immigration, I think that, right now there is so much animosity towards immigrants and so many accusations that they're poor. but I like to say, well, of course they're poor. I mean, if they weren't poor and they had great lives elsewhere, they wouldn't come here. People wouldn't give up their education, their friends, their family, their language, all of the comforts of their home if things were going just fine. Immigration occurs because people want to change their lives, because they want to improve their lives, because they want a better life for their children. That's why they come to the United States. And that's why so many, for example, educated immigrants without the language skills, doctors from other countries,
Right.
end up as cleaning offices, for example. This is not, this is for the sake of their children and their legacy, not necessarily themselves. And I think this whole idea that has been floating around in the last several years that we should be welcoming richer immigrants, well, I'm like, well, who are they? If you live in Norway, I can guarantee you that there's no way you're going to want to immigrate to the United States. There has to be necessity. And throughout American history, our immigration history is about folks in need, wanting a better life, coming to this country. And I think to think otherwise is to ignore the history of the United States.
So in addition to everything you do, I would guess that most of the people who arrive here have experienced some sort of trauma in the process.
Well, yes, there's always trauma built in with immigration, really. I mean, even under the best of circumstances, it's difficult, right? I mean, obviously, if you're uprooting yourself from your home, your friends, your family, you're coming into a different country without language ability, without connections, and you're trying to establish a new life. So under the best of circumstances, it's extraordinarily difficult. But in the last few years, the legal immigration aspect has become increasingly more difficult and somewhat painful. And that's where I think that IS fills an important void, because the majority of our clients, we work on a sliding scale basis because we're supported by grants and donors. And because of this, we charge very, very minimal fees to our clients who really do not, at this juncture, possess the language and educational skills to successfully petition the USCIS for their immigration needs. It's an extraordinarily complicated process. It becomes more complicated every day as the laws about immigration become tighter and stricter and are continuously shifting. It's difficult for myself and my colleagues to even keep abreast of the changes of immigration law. So you can imagine, for a recent immigrant, how daunting that can be. And submitting something to the immigration authorities, any sort of application, even a renewal of a green card, whatever it is, needs to be done correctly, because if it's not, it inadvertently land you in more trouble. So we try to be that. One of our goals is outreach. We try to go out into the community and let people know that we're there. So we do a lot of outreach at places like New London and Norwich, adult education, UCFS, different churches and community groups, food pantries, just to simply let them know that we're there so that we can start to establish trust in the community, which is really important these days.
Now, do you find New London a pretty supportive community in general, or are there things we could do as a city that would help?
I would say that, as a community, I find New London supportive. We receive block grants from the city of New London, and I feel that the energy of the people in New London is a very welcoming energy. And in Connecticut generally, I mean, I think the governor's letter to the president stating that he would welcome refugees to the state of Connecticut speaks to the generosity of our folks. So yes, I do feel that there is support. Of course, there isn't support as well. Both exist, but on the whole, yes, I feel New London is welcoming.
Now, you mentioned refugees, and maybe how do you differentiate between people who come as refugees and immigrants who come under other status?
Well, it's kind of a good question. I mean, the definition of what is a refugee and what is someone who is seeking asylum, which is an asylee, is technical. In essence, if you are a refugee, you are applying to come to the United States because of a well-founded fear that it's too dangerous to return to your home country because of the political state or because of your religion, because of domestic violence, because of gang violence. It's the same for people seeking asylum. The only difference is where you make that request. If you're a refugee, you're making that request outside of the United States. If you're an asylee, you've put one step into the United States physically and stated, I would like asylum. But the standards for both are the same. And so I think that, unfortunately, the administration and the trifecta of Guatemala, San Salvador, Honduras, and the complete political and economic stability of that region has caused, as you know, a flood of people coming over the border seeking asylum. One of the things that I find interesting is that when I first began, the administration's efforts were very much concentrated on reducing the number of people coming across the border. And the president—
Hence the wall.
And hence the wall, right. And the president kept talking about, folks need to get in line. They need to get in line. They need to get in line. And there's that old story about people in war, buddies in war where their friend gets shot, but they don't, and they feel bad, but on one level they feel relieved that it wasn't them. I felt sort of similarly because the majority of our folks are already here with status, legally here. And they want to apply for citizenship, or they want to apply for a family member to come. And when the president was constantly saying they have to get online, I thought, okay, well, we're cool.
They're in line already.
Right, all my folks are in line. We're just helping to process them so that they have a successful outcome. But then in the last year or so, it shifted so it went from get in line to and use family migration. And the term family migration, which is the whole bedrock of our immigration system, became chain migration, which has a much more negative connotation. And the president began to talk about chain migration.
It almost sounds like, looking at people who are here as infiltrators.
Yes.
Who just want to.
Yeah. So then I began to hear the rhetoric from the president, and the president was constantly talking about chain migration, and I thought, uh-oh, that's not good, because that's our folks. And ironically, his wife and his wife's parents are here as a result of, and I hear now her sister is coming as well. They're chain migrants, So, and he's done this twice because he's had 2 foreign wives. So his children are the product of this chain migration. But in any event,
we live in ironic times.
Yes, there's no explaining it. So we went to chain migration. And then recently, the talk from the president is simply, we're full. So there's no more support there was never support for the folks crossing the border. But now there's no more support for even the traditions of family immigration that have existed for decades, since our grandparents came to the United States, which is really, really sad.
So specifically, what kind of services do you provide to people who find themselves in the New London, Norwich area and need help to navigating some piece of the system?
Well, you have to understand that we are only 1.5 paid employees. I am the full-time employee, the executive director, and the attorney, and I have a wonderful assistant, a lawyer from Colombia, Angela Flores, who assists me. But we have folks like Kathy Parker, who must spend at least 20 hours a week helping us with grants. We have students from Connecticut College. We have adult volunteers who have retired. So we have a great intact board of directors. So our organization is up and running and functional, but again, there's 1.5 paid employees, which limits the scope of what we do. And when I started, I really wanted to make sure that we were fulfilling our mission, which was high quality legal services. So and we also had to take a look at economics. How many people could we help with the dollars that we had? So for this reason, for the reasons I've just talked about, we assist folks primarily with any USCIS application. What that means in effect is, and I'll go through those different applications in a minute, but we don't handle deportation and asylum cases. Not for any political sort of reason at all, but simply because we don't have the resources to. One asylum case, which Mike had before my time, literally closed our office for a month because it was so complex. And the complexity of these cases require a larger staff that we simply can't handle. So if we could see and assist 40 people in a month versus closing the office for one, we have to make those kind of hard decisions. Luckily, when folks come to see us, if they have asylum or deportation questions, I can refer them to other agencies in Connecticut doing those great work. So, again, we exist as a resource for them, but more as referral.
And those organizations, I assume, are centered more in our bigger cities.
Yeah, they're more in Hartford and New Haven, and they have large staffs, and they receive substantial state funding, which we don't receive. So they have the ability to take on those cases. But as I said, we assist in any USCIS related application. And that, first and foremost, there's naturalization. And then there are green cards or immigrant visas that we handle. There are applications for DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. There are applications for temporary protective services, which many folks from Haiti have that status, and they are in need of renewal. The Haitian Reunification Program has been coming up a lot as well. Then we also help with employment issues, employment cards, renewal of green cards. Again, any application that is going to be heard or reviewed by a USCIS officer, we're there for. And we see our clients through the whole process. So if there's a green card process or a naturalization process, we're there from the beginning. Excuse me, we're there. If USCIS comes back and requests additional information, which they always do now, it's sort of standard, and I'm there with them at the hearing to provide support.
Wow. So, and you said, is 40 cases a month sort of standard for you? That sounds like a pretty heavy caseload for 1.5 staff.
It is. And again, I think without our volunteers, we would be truly lost. Well, one of the things that inadvertently has happened that I think has added to the services that we provide is that in the last few years, there has been so much fear in the immigrant community about what could happen to them and what's going to happen to them. And inside of these immigrant communities, rumors run rampant. So people talk about a neighbor who was taken by ICE, or somebody else who was denied citizenship because they had a public benefit. Folks are just frightened to do anything for fear that somehow they're just going to be deported. And in a lot of cases, their fear is well-founded, but in many, many cases, their fear is not. For example, if you have legal permanent residency or you have a green card, you are here legally, permanently, and you have the right to live here for, unless you commit a crime, and you cannot simply be deported. And you can access public benefits like Husky or SNAP. But there are so many folks afraid to do anything because somehow they believe they'll end up deported, or they're afraid that if they access a public benefit, they won't be eligible for citizenship. So a lot of folks come to talk to us just to sort of thrash out what their rights are and what they can access and what they can't access. A lot of folks come to see us to see if there is a path to citizenship or a green card. Many times there simply is not, and that's simply the situation. But it's important to let people know what their choices are. Sometimes even if you have bad choices.
It's always better to know than not to know.
Exactly. So they can make preparation. So if, for example, they are deported and their child is a United States citizen, they can think through what they would like to happen in that case, whether they want to take the child back with them or leave them with a trusted relative, prepare the necessary documents. So we're there sort of, sometimes I feel like Lucy on the Peanuts with the legal advice. Just, because we can sort of sort through the smoke and mirrors and get down to sort of the nuts and bolts of what their particular issue is. And I'm happy to say that in a lot of instances, their fears are unfounded, and we can tell them to go ahead with their citizenship application or get Husky or SNAP for their children, that they're entitled to it because they are legal permanent residents.
Now, I noticed on your Facebook page there was something frequently asked questions about policy changes under the new Public Charge Act. Now, is this one of the things that people are nervous about?
Well, we were nervous about it until very recently. The public charge rule threatened to change the entire face of family-based immigration. Essentially, it would shut it down because the income requirements, first of all, like one myth I'd like to dispel is that poor people cannot immigrate to the United States. You can be relatively poor, but you have always had to show through an affidavit of support that if you don't have money, that there is a family member willing to support you. You cannot come to this country with absolutely no resources. But the public charge rule was just going to bulldoze through all of that, actually take away the entire affidavit of support and require folks to be able to prove, while they were still in the country of their origin, that they were, one, never going to need Husky or SNAP, never going to need a public benefit, and could support themselves. And that was a true nightmare because, the truth be told is that, most of the folks that come into our office are the working poor. They're working at for example, at Mohegan Sun or Foxwoods. They're making $12 or $14 an hour, and they simply can't afford an attorney, so they're here before me. But at the same time, they might also be eligible for Husky or SNAP. Now, this would simply erase any possibility for those folks to come into the country. So it was this gigantic 455-page disaster that was ready to destroy the entire face of family-based immigration. Yes, and I was giving talks on it. I was trying to prep agencies with how to deal with it. It took up an enormous amount of my time and energy, and folks were understandably and rightfully really worried. But as with so many other rules and proclamations that have come out of this administration, as soon as it became law, the next day, a group of agencies and attorneys general, Connecticut was one of them, it was Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey that banded together to file suit to enjoin the law from becoming operational. So as of now, Yes, the law was going to be this giant disaster, and right before it was going to be implemented, the day before, it was stopped. Another example of sort of what I consider the overreach by the administration is that it was almost the next day after, so this happened, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. So the next day, though, a proclamation came out. Now, I, as a lawyer, didn't even understand the legal import of a proclamation. I always thought they were ceremonial. You know, that you sort of, you know, it was like an honorary thing. Anyway, out came a proclamation that was even worse, that basically said that all immigrants have to prove that they will have private health care before they can enter the United States. Well, even if you're wealthy, you can't get private health care in the United States without a Social Security number. So again, this was going to shut down immigration again, and it became a really big deal. And everyone was worried about it. People were coming into our office. I was trying to educate people about it. But at the last moment again, there was another lawsuit filed which enjoined that law, from that proclamation, from taking effect. And there's just one more, and I'll stop. Then right after that, there was the fee waiver rule, which basically, because many of the applications come with a fee waiver, because USCIS fees are really high. You know, if you're trying to bring in a wife and 2 children, for example, it's going to be $3,000 or $4,000.
And it's intentionally prohibitive, I assume.
Yes, I think so. I think it's become punitive because a lot of folks come to see us who have absolutely the legal right to file the petition that they want, to bring their children or their wife or their parents into the United States. And when I give, and we cannot pay, even though our fees are really low, we can't pay their government fee.
Right.
And when I tell them the cost of it, many times they just leave. They say thank you, and they leave because they can't afford it. And the fees keep going up, so it becomes punitive. In any event, just to wrap this thought up, you know, so right after the public charge rule and then the healthcare proclamation came the fee waiver, which was basically going to destroy any opportunity for people without funds to apply and submit petitions with a fee waiver. So again, that went right up to the day of implementation, and then it was pulled again by yet another lawsuit filed by different agencies and attorneys general. But what I've been hearing, though, is that there are now so many lawsuits against the different rules and regulations that have come out of this administration that there aren't even resources to keep up with them anymore, you know.
Well, that's what, as you were talking about, you know, the sequence of events, I couldn't help but think how, you know, your time and energy could have been spent much more productively than, you know, educating people about things that were stopped the day before they were going to go into effect.
You know, it's true, I have to say, especially with the public charge rule. I mean, that was so epic that I was actually gathering social agencies, and I mean, there was this gigantic push of what to do in the face of public, and it's true, and then the next day it was gone. It may come back as it winds its way through the federal courts, but somehow I think it's unlikely, or it's several years away before we'll have to deal with that. But I think that behavior by the administration is intentional. I think it's meant to wear us out. And I think it's meant to discourage immigration. I see no, you know, other reason for it.
And I'm thinking, you know, over the last 20 years maybe, it seems like there is a lot more fear. I used to work for Head Start as a home visitor, and Head Start was one of the public, you know, programs that the parents did not have to be legal residents of the United States at all. And some of my families, the child who was in my class was a citizen, but parents were undocumented.
Right.
And but in that case, I mean, the parents did have jobs. They went to school. They had driver's licenses. They didn't seem to live in a state of everyday fear. They did have relatives who, you know, you mentioned the people who work at Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, a lot of my students were people from Pakistan whose relatives owned, or India whose relatives owned motels or convenience stores or gas stations. And they brought their relatives over who were very low-paid employees of these places.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true. One thing I should be clear about is that the folks working at the casinos are all legal permanent residents. I just want to make that very, very clear. That's an absolute requirement.
That's probably true with most really large employers.
It has to be, yes. It's simply, it's the law, you know, I mean. But I think what's happened, because even if you look at the numbers under the Obama administration, if you notice that immigration really, it wasn't on folks' radars so much during the Obama administration, and he had very, very high rates of deportation. But he had a policy in place that I think made a huge difference. He said, listen, focus on the folks that have committed crimes. Leave people who are working and going about their lives alone. And so that sent, I mean, different administrations set different tones for how immigration is going to work. So even though Obama's numbers for immigration were really high,
his policies were not that welcoming.
Right, they were not that welcoming. but the people that, the fear in the community was far less than it is now, because essentially, if you were just going about your business and not committing crimes or whatever, you were going to be left alone. And right now, that's completely out the window, and everybody is fair game, including folks that have been living here and working here and paying taxes, by the way, for the last 15 or 20 years. One of the things that people don't understand is that many, many, many undocumented folks pay taxes. And our Social Security system basically is built on their money, with the knowledge that they'll never be able to collect it. So in a sense, they're funding our Social Security benefits.
Yeah, I've never understood people, making the assumption that the undocumented, workforce is not paying taxes. In the case of families that I knew from my Head Start days, the families did have Social Security numbers. Their cards sometimes said not for employment. Some of them were students who had overstayed their visas, but they did have Social Security numbers, and they paid income tax in addition to the sales taxes and everything else that gets taxed.
I mean, the tax authorities are smart. They want to wring as much money out of all of us as they can. So they set up a system called the ITIN system, where without a Social Security card, you could still receive a tax number and pay taxes. So you have many undocumented individuals with an and the Treasury and the tax departments don't share this information with any other agency, like immigration, for a reason, because they want these folks here and working and paying taxes, because it helps contribute to our Social Security.
Wow, and of course, these workers will never be able to collect.
Probably not. A lot of them are paying taxes with the hope that someday they will be able to adjust their status and have full legal residency here. But for most of them, that's just not going to be a reality. I think what's happened, just to get back to what I was saying a moment ago, I think the fundamental shift that anybody is fair game now, and people are seeing in their communities, long-standing members of their communities just sort of disappear one day, and another disappears one day, and another disappears one day. And I think that's part of what's causing such, and for good reason, such tremendous fear.
Yeah, that's pretty unnerving if your neighbor is suddenly gone.
Some of my neighbors are gone, and I realized what happened, and I'm like, wow, they've just vanished. And these were productive members of our community. I'm not quite sure why this shift in emphasis. I can sort of somehow conceptualize better the idea of getting rid of people who have committed crimes, who are here, without papers. But I simply don't understand the point of pulling out productive members of our society randomly. But it's had an incredibly effective result because people are just now afraid and they're living in fear. They're not accessing the benefits that are available to them. And every day, as I deal with these USCIS applications and I deal with USCIS and I go to these hearings, I see the screws are continuously tightened.
And it seems to me, looking in the long run, that could have a terrible effect on our economy.
Well, it's really interesting. I met with the Chamber of Commerce recently for Southeast Connecticut, and it was their supposition that's been backed up by statistics that what is propping up the economy in Southeast Connecticut is our immigrant community. That actually, absent our immigrant community, there would be a noticeable reduction in the population in this area. So there's actually studies that show that not only are they not a drain on society, but they're actually assisting us economically. And that's going to be one of the things that I'm going to be working with, our agency is going to be working with the Chamber of Commerce to make the argument that, it's not, that immigration and supporting immigration is not just a nice thing to do, but it's also an economically viable thing to do that's in all of our best interests.
So since you talked about that population, let's talk a little bit about the 2020 census, because that's coming up. I think the atmosphere of fear won't help get everyone counted. So what can we do about it?
Well, that's actually a really interesting question, because as you know, yet another one of the president's proposals was to ask people whether, on the census form, whether they were documented or undocumented. And that just became a gigantic fight that also ended up in the courts and was also stopped by the courts.
Thank goodness. That would have been a disaster.
Yes. But Rona, I think to a certain extent the damage has been done, because now people, of course, heard about that, and then rumors started that the census was going to be a way to sort of ferret out who's documented and who's undocumented so that ICE will have an easier time deporting them. And so now we have to push back against that fear and that rumor really hard. And I met with Eva Brunel, who's sort of coordinating the efforts in Connecticut to get everybody counted. And IASC is partnering with them. They have many, many, many partners, including the City of New London, to ensure that everybody is counted. And it's so vitally important for all of us that absolutely everyone be counted, because if somebody is not counted and they are absorbing dollars, there's not going to be any compensation from the federal government for that person. So unless everybody is counted, it's the only way to ensure adequate compensation for cities like New London, for example, that have a large immigrant population, or Norwich, that also have a large immigrant population. So we've partnered with the census folks in Connecticut, and what we're going to do as part of our intake process is sort of educate people about the importance of taking part in the census, and really, really stressing the truth, which is that it's absolutely safe to participate in it. That information, since the beginning of, I don't want to say the beginning of time, since the first census was ever taken, which I think was in 1870 or 1880, there has always been absolute and complete confidentiality. That information is not shared with any agency whatsoever under any circumstances. And in fact, census takers swear to an oath by which they face up to 5 years in jail or a $250,000 fine for revealing any information to anyone outside of the agency. So they take people's privacy very, very seriously. So it's completely safe to take part in the census. And it is so absolutely important, especially for folks in the immigrant community, to come forward and be counted. So as part of that process, when folks are in our office, we're going to talk to them about it. We have pamphlets in different languages. We have students who speak different languages. And hopefully we're going to just be able to do like a one-stop shop where they just come in, we discuss their immigration issues, and then put them in front of a computer and say, would you like to fill out the census? Of course, it's not coercive. But one of the arguments that I think is a really good one is if you don't fill it out online or on the telephone, then census workers will be knocking on your door. So if you don't want them knocking on your door, it's better to get it over with. Because census workers are, and this was news to me actually, I've been learning this just recently. Census workers have an obligation to try 12 times to reach every family in the United States. So I think there's a great incentive in simply getting it over with.
Yeah. And you mentioned, you have people, with different languages. What languages does your office deal with, and how many different languages are there of people coming into the New London County?
Well, of course there's a lot, right? But there are two outstanding ones, which I don't think will be a surprise to you. I mean, in New London, we have a large Spanish-speaking population. And in Norwich, they have a very large Haitian Creole population. So those are the two languages that we see come up mostly. But of course, it's every other language, right? It's literally every other
My preschool
language.
class had, I think, 11 children in it, and 1 or 2 years we had 6 different home languages among 11 kids.
Yeah. And I think for our agency, we always have enough Spanish speakers on hand that if translation is necessary, it's not a problem. But we're always in search of, so I guess I'll make the pitch right now.
Sure.
We're always in search of volunteers who could translate Haitian Creole. Because, I mean, even if they just came 1 day a week for a few hours, we could put all those appointments there, because that is a problem. And folks just feel comfortable and safe when there's somebody like them sitting next to them,
And we in the United States are really slow about language.
Yeah, we are.
I learned years ago that in most of the world, bilingualism, multilingualism are kind of the norm, but in the United States it seems as though it's almost a suspect to be anything but English only.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, there's a joke, and I'm terrible at jokes, so I can't remember it, but the punchline is, what do you call someone who speaks only one language, and it's American?
Yeah.
And, I'm guilty of that too. I mean, it's a shame, but our foreign language education has been really lacking as compared to most of the world.
Now, I wanted to ask you, well, 2 things. But first, what can people do other than donate to your organization or offer translation services to support you?
Well, I just like to say that, just to sort of back this up a little bit, that donation's really important. We are struggling like so many other not-for-profits just to sort of keep the lights on. And we have a lot of people supporting us, like the City of New London and the Community Fund, and we have many great grantors. But the grants are usually small, so donations are really, really appreciated.
And probably things that are not restricted, because operating costs grantors usually don't want to spend money on.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit before the program. One of the ironies of so many grants is that they restrict brick and mortar, utilities, and salaries, and that's just essentially what we are. We have a space, we have utilities, and we have me. So that knocks us out of a lot of sort of grantors' sort of priorities. But we have been able to. Listen, I don't want to sound ungrateful. We receive at least 24 different grants that really are vital to us continuing day to day. But we've been told in no uncertain terms that what we need to build up is our donor list. So any folks out there with an interest in supporting immigration, especially an interest in, I think everybody can, there can be many disagreements over what to do with asylees, what rights they should have, what rights they shouldn't have. I think that, it would be fine to have an intelligent conversation about this. But family-based immigration has been the bedrock of our immigration system since, well, like I said, our grandparents came. And so for any donors out there that do understand the importance of it, I would ask that they contribute.
And well, the end of the year, I guess it doesn't matter as much anymore because tax law has changed, but traditionally the end of the year is the time that all the nonprofits are making their pitch.
Yeah, I guess it is for tax laws. And that's a bit of a problem, right? Because many folks open up their email and there's many requests in their mailbox. So how do you pick and choose? But I'm here to ask today, pick us.
Yeah. And people don't only have to pick I ask,
right.
but
right.
put it on the list.
Exactly.
Because there are so many asks. And I guess, I wanted to ask you also, like you talked about partners who are also often not-for-profit organizations that like who you work with and where else people might be able to donate that would sort of indirectly support you?
Well, one of the partners that's sort of near and dear to my heart is Safe Futures. And so Safe Futures is there for people who don't know, they're there to assist people who are in domestic abuse situations, to help them get out of it, to help them get resituated, to help them get on with their lives. But if they also have immigration-related issues tied to their abusive relationship, then they refer their clients to us. And vice versa, if I am noticing during the course of an interview that there seems to be domestic abuse or emotional abuse or a refusal by a husband, for example, to help process his wife to get a green card in order to control her or him, we have actually it going both ways, then I send them to Safe Future. So we have a great relationship, and I think that they're doing really great work.
Now, if anyone who watches this is in a position or knows someone who might, benefit from your services, what's the best way to contact you?
The best way to contact us is to call us, and I'm going to give you the phone number. I have to read it, excuse me. It's 860-629-7758. That's 629-7758, and we're in office Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5. And you can give us a call, set up an appointment, and the great thing is for $20, you get to see an attorney. You get my undivided attention for half an hour, whatever it takes, and you'll leave with a game plan.
And then from there on.
Yeah, sometimes we develop a working relationship and process their applications and see them from beginning to end. Other times they simply want to know their options and their rights. Whatever it is, what we want to do is when there's immigration anxiety in households, it really wears on the household. It creates a lot of stress. So if we can remove some of that stress, we find that people are more productive, that they're happier, that they're more engaged. And it has a lot of ramifications, because if you're worried about your status, well, that's a huge thing. That's like worrying about food or the roof over your head. It's an essential. And if we can help remedy that, then we're doing our job.
And it's good for the individual and their community and actually the city, the region.
Right. You can really make the argument that that this filters down into every aspect of our culture's lives. Employees without that in stress in the back of their minds, do better work. Children without that stress of seeing their parents so stressed do better at school and are happier and more productive. So yeah, I think that, I think that immigration issues and immigration stress and the possibilities of reducing this are vitally important. And that's part of what we do.
Well, I think we're about out of time. So if people want to donate, I noticed that on your website you have a donation button. So there's online donation. I saw also there's a Facebook page that seems to have, keep more up-to-date events or
Yes.
news on it.
Yes.
So people can learn more. And I guess I want to thank you for coming on and making time in your very busy schedule.
Oh, thank you very much.
I invited Mike a few times over the last several years. It's like he couldn't even find like an hour out of his
Right.
busy week
Right.
that to come away. So I really appreciate that. And people who are viewing, I ask, now I have to read what the name
Yes,
is,
exactly,
Immigration Advocacy and Support Center, which is located in downtown New London.
At 8 Washington Street, New
Yeah.
London, 06320.
And it's one of our local organizations worth supporting.
And I just want to thank you, Rona, because by bringing organizations like ours to the forefront, you are doing a great service, because half the battle is sort of getting the word out there. So I thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you. And I think our next show we're going to have Kathy Zoll on talking about the Homeless Hospitality Center. So
great.
we'll continue on this role as long as we can get people to come and talk about their organizations. So we'll see you next week.
Thank
and
you
thanks
again.
again, Joe.
Appreciate it.